Good morning. Today we'll discuss Aristotle's theory and conception of tragedy. To start with, first we'll talk about the Greek conception of tragedy. It must be kept in mind that the Greek conception of tragedy was different from the modern conception. Today we regard tragedy as a story with an unhappy ending. But this was not Greek conception. In the Greek language, the word tragedy means a goat song, and the word came to be used for plays because of the practice of awarding goats to winners in a dramatic contest. On the days of the dramatic festivals, 4 plays were performed on each of the days. 3 were generally serious in nature and 1 satire. For the Greeks, tragedy simply meant one of the 3 serious plays presented before the satire play at a dramatic festival. Greek tragedies were serious in tone, but many of them had happy endings. The Greek conception of tragedy should be kept in mind, for Aristotle did not consider tragedy from the modern point of view. That is why 2 out of the 4 possible tragic plots move from misery to happiness. It should also be kept in mind that Aristotle was not familiar with modern drama, and his views are based entirely on the Greek drama, which alone he knew. Next, how is tragedy different from other poetic forms? Aristotle began by pointing out that imitation is the common basis of all the fine arts, which, however, differ from each other in their medium of imitation, their objects of imitation, and their manner of imitation. Therefore, poetry differs from painting and music in its medium of imitation. Poetry itself is divisible into epic and dramatic on the basis of its manner of imitation. The epic narrates while the dramatic represents through action. The dramatic poetry itself is distinguished as tragic or comic on the basis of its objects of imitation. Tragedy imitates men as better and comedy as worse than they really are in real life. In this way, Aristotle establishes the unique nature of tragedy and differentiates it from the other forms of poetry. Now, what is the origin of tragedy and how is it superior from the epic? Aristotle has traced the origin and development of poetry, and in the beginning, the poetry was of 2 kinds. There were iambics or invectives on the one hand, and the hymns on the gods on the other. The first iambs are developed into satiric poetry, and the hymns and panegyrics into epic or heroic poetry. Out of heroic poetry developed tragedy, and out of satiric came the comedy. Tragedy later developed in a higher form, that is the epic. The Greek philosopher compares tragedy with, in chapter 26 of the Poetics, he says that tragedy is compared with epic, and it can be compared in a number of respects and demonstrates this superiority. Both epic and tragedy imitate serious subjects in grand verse, but they differ in as much as epic imitates only in kind of verse, and tragedy uses different kinds of verse. The epic is more lengthy and so more comprehensive, whereas on the other hand, tragedy has much greater concentration, so is more effective. Besides this, the tragedy has all the elements which the epic has, while there are certain elements of tragedy which the epic does not have. The epic lacks music and spectacle, which are important constituents of tragedy and which enhances the effect. It has also reality of presentation and unity of action, both of which the epic lacks. Therefore, we can say the tragedy is superior because all the parts of an epic are included in tragedy, but those of tragedy are not all of them to be found in the epic. Now we come to the definition of tragedy. Aristotle defines tragedy as the imitation of an action, serious, complete, and of a certain magnitude, in a language beautified in different parts with different kinds of embellishment, through action and not narration, and through scenes of pity and fear, bringing about the catharsis of these emotions. Unquote. This definition has wide implications. It falls naturally into two parts. The first part can be the imitation of an action and not a narration. Tragedy, as one of the imitative arts, points out its medium, objects, and manner of imitation. The second part is concerned with the function and emotional effects of tragedy. Thank you. We will discuss the other elements of tragedy in our next lecture.